The first matter is PLN 160146, the Porter Estates Company, Bradley Ranch LLC, Trio Petroleum, Commission to fly.
So in full disclosure, I want to state that I am a property owner in the Standard oil fields with Chevron and Aera, but I have no financial ties to Trio Petroleum. In an abundance of caution, I contacted the Fair Political Practices Commission, and they decided I do not have a conflict of interest, and I also consulted two independent attorneys, and they said I do not have a conflict of interest.
Okay, and I take,
Forgot.
were you present at the last?
One more thing. I was not, but I watched the tapes.
Thank you. And Commissioner Mendoza.
I also watched the tapes.
Thank you. Okay. With that, staff.
Sure, yes. I was absent that day and I did not work.
Oh,
I did not.
So, thank you. I was trying to remember who was absent that day. Ran around after me. Okay, so if you did not watch the tape, then I would recommend that you abstain from today's vote because, from the standpoint of due process, all of the hearing on December 13th is part of the evidence that came in. If you could abstain, that would probably be the best thing for the Planning Commission's decision.
Okay. With that, staff, please proceed when ready.
Okay. Good morning, Chair, members of the Commission. On December 13th, the Commission opened the public hearing, heard public testimony, and passed a motion of intent to direct staff to return with a resolution to deny the project. Staff has prepared a resolution with findings and evidence based on Commission direction. Correspondence on the project that is attached to the staff report includes an email from Steve Craig of South County Citizens Alliance in opposition to the project, as well as a letter from the applicant responding to Mr. Craig's email. Since the packet went out, staff received an email from Steve Craig and Charles Rowley of South County Citizens Planning Alliance with further information opposing the project. In the message, Steve Craig indicated that he will not be able to attend today's meeting due to illness. And then late yesterday, we received a letter from Jason Ritterer, who's representing the applicant, which contends that the resolution before the Planning Commission is not supported by substantial evidence. We also received a letter dated January 30th from the Center for Biological Diversity urging the Commission to deny the project, as well as the other correspondence that we received. We just received them mentioned by Melissa. That concludes the staff report.
Okay, thank you. Do we have speaker slips for this item?
Yes, Chair Van Meer, we do.
Okay, well, what we're going to do is we are going to, before we go to the public speakers, we're going to ask the applicant or the applicant's representative to speak, and then following that, we will move to public testimony in the order in which the speaker slips were received. So if you please state your name for the record, we appreciate it.
My name is Steve Raleigh. I'm with Trio Petroleum. We're the applicant. And I've got a thing to plug in.
You can take that by yourself.
So my name is Steve Raleigh, I'm with Petroleum with the applicant on this. As you recall, we were presented back on December 13th. But for those that weren't here, just briefly, we started this process back in May of 2016. We met with the county. We had 4 different ideas in the Ames Valley prospects. We met with the county and told them that, disclosed everything we had, our geophysical data and whatnot. We wanted to know from them whether we should apply for one well at a time or whether we should apply for all 4 under one permit. After discussion, they recommended doing all 4. The reason being, even though they were separate prospects, they weren't all one big prospect, they were separate prospects, they were in fairly close proximity. And then when we did the initial study would encompass each particular 2-acre well site and also a general area around all 4 well sites because they were so close. So that's what we did. We submitted the application in July 2016, and on July 28th of 2016, it was deemed complete by planning. We had a South County Land Use Advisory Committee meeting in July as well. They voted 5-1 to approve our project. After the project was deemed complete, in December of 2016, the county contracted with Rincon Consultants. Rincon is an environmental outfit that the county, it's on their list of approved contractors. They chose Rincon to do the initial study for our project, and evidently how that works, we deal through the county, they deal with Rincon, then back that way, I guess, to keep it, at arm's length. So when we paid our money, we paid our $75,000 for this study, went through the county into Rincon. County directed Rincon in the work putting together the initial study. That was in December of 2016. In August of 2017, the county had put together a mitigated negative declaration that was based upon Rincon's work. And we had to agree with that because in that mitigated negative deck, although everything was less than significant or not significant, there were 39 mitigating conditions we had to agree to, and we did. We came to the hearing in 2013, and staff put forward a recommendation to the Planning Commission to approve our project under the mitigated negative declaration that they put forward. Go to the next slide. Go to the next one. In that box there, this is what's considered under the mitigated negative deck. Go to the next one. There we go. These are all the issues, the factors, the environmental factors that are looked at in a study that Rincon did. You can see it's pretty comprehensive: aesthetics, agriculture, air quality, archaeological, biological, forest, geologic, minerals, noise, population, public, septic systems, soil erosion, solid waste, water quality, vegetation, all the cumulative effects, toxic, hazardous. These are all the factors that are considered by Rincon, the county's consultant, in doing the research to put together an environmental report that resulted in a mitigated negative deck. Go ahead, man. We're going to flip through these pretty fast. This mitigated negative deck was filed up to August 7th. And in the title page, which you've got there in that box, it says this proposed project will not have a significant effect on the environment, that the project will not have the potential to significantly degrade the quality of the environment, the project will have no significant impact on long-term environmental goals, the project will have no significant cumulative effect on the environment, and the project will not cause substantial adverse effects on human beings, either directly or indirectly. Those are the conclusions of the of Rincon, the county's consultant. Go ahead to the next. And next. These are some of the reviewing agencies that this was passed around to: the Air Quality, Energy Commission, Native American Heritage. You can see it's the water quality, Regional Water Quality Board, and other water quality folks, the Toxic Substances Control Department, and Water Resources. All get copies of this report from Rincon. Go to the next. This is also a distribution list that was handed out to. You can see there are a lot of people saw this. It went out to all these agencies and all these people. The only thing that planning received back was something from air quality, which was addressed in the mitigation measures. Next. We're going to flip through these fairly quickly, but I just wanted to give anybody that's here and maybe on the board and hasn't seen how comprehensive this is. They go through all those different boxes that we mentioned before, and in every case, there was either no impact, less than significant impact, or less than significant with the mitigation incorporated. Go ahead and flip through these. This is agriculture and forest. Go ahead. Air quality. Oh, go back to air quality. You can see that a couple of those boxes are in the less than significant with mitigation. Those mitigation measures were included in the 39 that we agreed to, but even with the mitigation measures, they were less than significant. And the rest is less than. Okay, go ahead. Biological resources also, again. Cultural resources, go ahead. Geological, go ahead. Greenhouse gas emissions, well, everything they checked there was less than a significant impact. Go ahead. Hazardous materials, next. Hydrology and water quality, I can't quite see that very well. But as you can see, all the boxes that are checked on the right-hand side, which is less than significant impact, go ahead. Land use and planning, again, less than significant impact or no impact, go ahead. Mineral resources, go ahead. Noise, no impact, go ahead. Population housing, no impact, go ahead. Public services, less than significant or no impact, go ahead. Recreation, no impact. Go ahead. Again, less than. The reason I'm flipping through these is just it was amazing to me how comprehensive Rincon was in their work. This study took 4 to 6 months. Like I said, it cost us about $75,000, and they just left no stone unturned. Go ahead. At the mandatory finding, this is a more or less a summary at the very end of their checklist. And in the areas where there was less than significant impact with mitigation incorporated, on these pages 89, 90, and 91, it talked about, it addressed all the less than significant with mitigation incorporated. Based on the analysis throughout the initial study, the proposed project would not have the potential to degrade the quality of the environment. Talked about that. Also with air quality. And with environmental effects, that the impact on humans would be less than significant. It's an incredible study. We want to make sure that it's on the record. And it sets up, the reason I go through it is it sets up our council's response to the latest draft resolution that was put forward at your direction. I'm going to introduce our council here. He's going to come up here and address that in detail, and probably also talk about how Z fits into this process, sends a lot of letters and a lot of the planning staff response in this latest draft resolution talked about Z. That's where we are today. It's important, I think, that in today's just polarized political climate, it really needs to be our goal, all of our goal to make certain that the governing agencies that address permits and land use and things like that they don't become politically weaponized, but that they're fair and they look at the facts, they look at the merits of a project, and they don't rely on any kind of political ideology, because that would hurt us all. I'd like to introduce David Balch, our counsel on this. I've got a couple of things that I'd like to be sure to put into the record. Go ahead and hand those to the staff.
If you have multiple copies, what are you doing?
This is a copy of the PowerPoint in hard copy and on a flash drive you can have. And this is a copy of the permit that we originally put together. I just want to make sure that it's in there in case we have to refer to it.
That's your permit file? Is that what that is?
That's the application for the original permit.
Yep. Are there multiple copies there, or just one copy?
When we originally did that, we handed out 10 copies, and so there are 10 copies floating around now. And we can get copies for it if you like, or we can give you the digital, I'm sure, plan. Okay? Thanks.
If I may, through the chair, sir, did you not distribute the application and permit at one of the hearings? The big packet you just submitted to us?
A year or so ago, when we turned our permit in, we turned in, I think, to Anna Kenga was the receiving officer, or receiving planner on that. We turned in, I think, 10 to 13 copies to her, and how they were distributed, I don't know, but I know they were around. It's just in these proceedings, and the last time it didn't come up, I want to make sure that it's there for reference.
Thank you.
Let me just say, if the commission wants staff to make copies of those, staff could do so. Otherwise, they are going to be part of the administrative record. So
I think we can go ahead and make that part of the administrative record. I don't think that needs to read through an old permit application file.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is David Balch, and I'm here on behalf of TRIO. And I want to make a couple of quick observations in support of the application. First, as the Commissioners know, any findings by the Commission have to be supported by substantial evidence. And it's critical that we understand what substantial evidence means. It's relevant information and reasonable inferences, enough relevant information and reasonable inferences that a fair argument can be made to support a conclusion. It does not include arguments, speculation, unsubstantiated opinions or concerns about a project's environmental impact. There needs to be a specific factual foundation in the record for a finding. In one case site noted, dire predictions by non-experts regarding the consequences of a project do not constitute substantial evidence. The reason why I raise this is there is an abundance of evidence in this case. There was a biology report, an extensive biological report, a mitigated negative declaration that you've just seen the overview on, and staff reviewed all of that and approved, or recommended approval of this project. I understand at the last hearing that this board, this commission did not accept that and asked for contrary findings. However, the findings that have come back are extraordinarily general and vague and do not constitute substantial evidence. There's no citation to the record in those findings, for example. There's no citations to experts, for example. There's no citation to any evidence. Rather, it is simply argument passing as findings, and that would not be a sufficient basis. Now, I want to emphasize two quick points here. At the time of the last hearing, the Measure Z ruling had not been issued. It has now been issued, and it is a strident ruling. I can say that I sat through the entire trial. For those that don't know Judge Wills, he's a former plaintiff's attorney who, at the beginning of the process, was very sympathetic to the county's concerns and understood the county's concerns over Z. He appeared, though, to understand the overwhelming arguments raised by the industry against Measure Z because of preemption and takings. His opinion is extremely strong, well-reasoned, and I believe will clearly be upheld on appeal if it goes that far. It is a 52-page opinion which addresses these issues. First, Judge Wills noted that the county cannot, through its land use regulations, preempt state review of the oil and gas industry, and in particular of the downhole activities of the oil and gas industry. The county said we are merely regulating the location of wells and not the downhole aspects of it, the under the ground. And Judge Wills said that was simply a pretextual argument, and he rejected it swiftly. He noted that under both state and federal law, that DOGGR, the Department of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources, has sole and exclusive authority to regulate downhole, and that includes the new wells. It includes the ability to drill new wells, and he ruled on that. Public Resources Code 3106. Again, I encourage you to read that opinion because I believe it is very, very strong. Next, on the takings issue, and this is what I want to focus on here today. This has not been a focus so far. Judge Wills stated that when you have a mineral rights owner or a leasehold owner with mineral rights, It was a prima facie taking to not allow the drilling of a new well. Because he rules for preemption, he said we will not look at the remedy for the taking. But he ruled that Measure Z was an illegal taking, not a possible taking, and a right now illegal taking as concerns mineral rights owners. Very strong opinion. If the county does not allow the drilling of these wells, it will be a prima facie taking. Nobody wants to go there. Finally, we've seen from the Center for Biological Diversity that they raised two main issues in their opposition that I want to address. One is they contend that the negative declaration is insufficient because it doesn't go into the environmental impacts of a future well field. And without knowing what's going to happen 20 years from now, how can you vote on exploratory wells? Under Public Resources Code 21090.1, geothermal exploration projects shall be deemed to be separate and distinct from subsequent field development projects. Under CEQA, you do an initial study for the exploratory, and then if you need to come back because the wells were successful exploratory, you do another EIR review process on a field development project. They are simply wrong on the law. Second, if you look at all their challenges, they're fracking challenges. We're not doing fracking. If you look at their challenges, none of what they raised is actually directed at my client's project. They don't look at condition 14 and say why it's insufficient. They don't look at condition 9. They don't look at condition 36. All they say is, in general, these projects might be bad. That is not substantial evidence, and critically, it is not tailored to this case. And for all of those reasons, we want this to move forward orderly. We have spent, the county has spent, enough money on Measure Z. It was thrown out. And I know that's not a universally loved opinion, but it was thrown out. And more importantly, with regards to taking, the judge said, and if you want to move forward with Z, you must pay mineral rights holders for their loss. And that needs to be factored into what this commission is doing today. For all those reasons, Mr. Redder summed it up all nicely in his paper. I will not regurgitate all of that line by line. I know you've had a chance to look at it. With that, I'll rest unless there are any questions from the commission.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Through the chair.
Commissioner Mendez.
I have a question for Mr. Raleigh.
Yes.
I need to go back to your slides,
Sure.
and can you just go back?
If I could, I would.
Yeah, okay. Keep going. I guess I missed it. Anyway, there's a section there in one of your slides that says Department of Water Resources.
Yes.
And what I didn't get, and probably I missed it, is which departments? Because you have San Luis Obispo County there.
Well, up on here, there's a regional water quality on the right side, number 5, and then you move down, there's an SWRCB water quality, and then staff may be able to answer. This is their report, actually. Go to the next list too, Fran, that's interesting on there. Clearinghouse.
I was looking for Monterey County Water Resource Agency, but I didn't see it.
There's the Monterey County Agricultural.
But I did not see the Monterey County Water Resource Agency. Because it says, go to the slide right there. It says Department of Water Resources, and I'm just asking myself, well, which Department of Water Resources?
I couldn't answer that because I didn't do that distribution.
Okay.
The county planning did.
Okay.
They might be able to answer it.
Okay.
Yes, Bob Schubert. Yes, the water resources, the county water resources agency was part of our internal review of that environmental document.
Thank you
Before it
for
went public.
And to Mr. Balch, And if I pronounce that wrong, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Everybody does, even I do, so.
Obviously, I'm not an attorney, and I would like for our attorney to help me out on this. You stated that any finding by the commission has to be made by a substantial evidence. Could our attorney please explain that to us, or to me?
Well, I mean, are you finished with your presentation at this point?
I am, but we reserve time for rebuttal.
Yeah, well, you'll have time at the end of public testimony.
We have a few more slides here that is.
Okay, well, what I'd like to do is, if it's okay with you, Commissioner Mendez, is just let them finish their thing, and if you want to go straight to having a question with counsel, we can do that then ahead of the public testimony, but I'd like to at least get this taken care of.
Yeah, we'll work through the rest of these slides, not that many. It's more of an overview of the project and the geologic settings. Just to get, again, we're of the opinion you get more information is better than the better decision can be made. This is Stan Eschner, geologist, Trio.
Stan Eschner, thank you for entertaining these comments. And I'm a registered geologist for the state of California. And the first exhibit that you have there right now just shows the location of the project relevant to Bradley, about 4 or 5 miles from Bradley, 15 miles from Rockwood, 12 miles at least from the city of San Arlo, and about the same distance again from San Miguel. So it's quite distant from any residential area. Next, please. This is just a regional map, shows you the giant San Arlo oil field, which is an anticline in the upper right-hand corner, 500 million barrel field. And the lower central part, it shows the proposed location of our project, and you can see the lone road going across on that, and the road cutting right down through is not semi end up not seeing that a lake road. It cuts right down through, splits our project and gives us access. Next, can you hear me? What am I talking about? I thought I'd start by making sure all of you knew what an anticline was, because that's what we're looking for. And you're looking at bedding. I don't have a pointer, so it makes it a little difficult, but all of these layers of rock that you're looking at were laid down flat in the ocean. Does that work up there? I think it was, you're all looking at your own screens, you're not. Yeah, so we'll just stick with that, that's okay. And they were laid down flat, and they were laid down in the ocean, one layer after the other, the oldest on the bottom, the youngest at the top. And then and their whole civilization is living in the ocean, the drop plants and animals, and they are incorporated in those rocks. And if you happen to be one of those little particles between the sand grains or whatever, you would turn to oil. And then when the rocks are deformed, as these are, then you have what's called an anticline, which is the high one where the oil is shown, and the low one, oil floats on water, and there's seawater that's buried in the sand, of course, and so the oil floats up, gets as high as it can, but then there'll be a permanent impermeable layer that you can't get through. So that's how you form an oil field. And that's called an anticline, and that's the most popular way to find it in a sense, and worldwide. So next. This is an actual outcrop, a view of the field of just rock layers out by Barstow, California, just showing that it's such a nice scene. It shows all these little thin layers all folded up into an anticline. And if that were a marine layer or something, it could be perspective. Of course, it's in the outcrop, and it's not. It's just an example of what they look like. Next. I'm turning to the Los Angeles Basin. 10 million years ago, it was underwater. It was not a basin as it was not part of California's landscape. And it was a very deep, deep area. And almost 30,000 feet of layer after layer of sediment was deposited in it. Then it had folding, and every green spot that you see, essentially, is an anticline. And in that basin, it's a very rich one in this world for its size. There are 61 anticlines, every one is oil buried, none are barren. And that field, that area has produced over 11 billion barrels of oil. Next. Coming to our area, you have the San Arlo oil field, 500 million barrels. That's an anticline. And then you turn to our area, and we think that we have discerned 4 anticlines defined by our Geophysical Survey. And I want to show you what those look like. Next. First of all, go back one slide, please, just one. You'll see a blue line, diagonal line, that goes from the southwest to the northeast, just south of the San Arlo field. And now I'm going to act like that's a birthday cake that we're looking at. Cut that line down and look sideways at that line. So you're looking at what's called a cross section. And now you're looking at a cross section of the earth, just like layers in a cake. And the Monterey, and it's quite deep. The basement there is about 13,000 feet deep. And you've got layers of sand and shale, principally shale, all the way up to the top of the Monterey Formation. And that's all of this basin is underlain by granite. That's that green line that goes up and it shallows. And as you get to the other side, you can see that the thick area where most of the oil could be generated would be right in the middle of that basin where you've got lots of sediment that's organic to generate hydrocarbons. Next. This is a view, a much more detailed view on the top of our objective interval at about 5,000 feet deep. And these are just contours showing that each of the areas, areas 1, 2, 3, and 4, the largest is about 325 acres, the smallest is about 93. And that map cost about $2 million to make. It's the result of a 3-dimensional geophysical survey, an intensive study, and interpretive work. Next. This again is a cross-section where we cut through one of these layers just to show you what it looks like if you look from the side. And you can see the reason that it's never been found before. You think, why wasn't this found years ago? There's been months of work. Well, it's because as you look toward the top, you'll see that there's no structural configuration. The beds are just essentially flat lying. And as you go deeper to about 4,000 to 5,000 feet where you see the yellow band, the anticline has begun to really show itself. And that's our target in each case. And that's where we propose to drill from a 2-acre surface site above each one. Next. This is what a surface site looks like. It's all on either farm or grazing land. And you can see perhaps in that little pile of grass there's a vertical stake. And that's a staked location, and all the survey work has been done around that in the whole general area. There's area that's plowed and disturbed and fairly flat. Next. And our concept here is very important for you to understand that we're going to have about a 2-acre surface site, and if the objectives that we're after, the oil bearing formation is down where you see that dark brown, those show wells going out from the surface. The wells at the top will be about 20 feet apart. And at the bottom, they'll be about 10 acres apart. So if we had a 100-acre pool, a well, we would probably have each well draining 10 acres. It's like if you were drinking a milkshake with a single straw. You could do it pretty handily, but what if your milkshake was as big as this room? You need more straws, but you never get it out in a lifetime. So we have to have maybe 10 wells. But at the surface, it'll all be within that same, you might have to enlarge the site to 3 acres, but something like that. 20 acres, about 20 feet per well. And everything will be very compact. That way we'll need the 1-tank farm and all of that. Yeah. And this is our surface location. This is about 150 feet by 200 feet. And it shows all the equipment within that space. The drilling takes about 2 weeks. And we don't know that we're going to find anything. We can't prove that. We know how to drill a dry hole. But we also believe in what we're doing. And that's why so many wells are drilled. Go ahead and next slide, please. The one slide I thought we had, we don't, which shows all the, there have been, in the area right around us, there have been 2,760 wells drilled within the area around us. And we would need 4 more. That's all we'd be adding. And we cannot do more than that unless we're successful. And we don't know that we'll be successful. We want to check each idea. And the idea of exploration well is not only just to see if the oil is there, it's to also see how much it might be there. How thick is the zone? What's the gravity of the oil? How deep is it? And how can we, really good workmanlike, safe, and businesslike manner, bring it to the surface and to the market? And that's where the next study would come in. And we could not proceed, or would we want to, until we satisfied all those demands. And I want to show you this exhibit here because some of you I know are keenly concerned about any influence we might have on water. And here's where it would be helpful for I'm going to use the, that works good. You may have to work up there. Here's, we drilled, so I can read it from here, I can't read that far. First of all, just to get stability to the drilling rig, which is there for only 2 weeks, we drilled about a 30-inch hole or something, about 40 feet deep, and then we set a string of pipe inside of that and cement that. And then we drilled, we drilled a 14 3/4-inch open hole as deep as we need to drill to protect the water sand. If there's a water sand at 500 or 600 feet, or say it's 300 feet thick, we make sure we drill that open hole 300 or 400 feet below that, and then we set a string of pipe inside of that and cement that in. So we have not only the layer of steel, but the cement to protect it. Then we drill the main hole, which is a 9 7/8 open hole all the way down to the formation where the oil is. And that's shown by just a rough line. And then we set 7-inch casing, a piece of heavy steel, all the way from the surface down to that, and we cement behind that all the way to the surface. And so now we've got the sand already protected by 2 very thick, important strings of pipe. And then, when the sand is perforated and the oil comes into the wellbore, we run an inner string, which you can see, that is 2 7/8" tubing, and we test that to 5,000 pounds pressure to make sure it has total integrity. And then inside of that, we run rods, and we have a little pump at the bottom, and the oil comes up that inner string of tubing. So we actually have 3 strings of steel pipe between us and any water, and it is not a problem in any respect, and never will be. And I just like to say that that's kind of included. I said, we're trying to fill an American dream here. I mean, we worked really hard on this. We've been involved in this keenly for almost 10 years, and we're trying to do it with a front door approach to that. We're trying to do the right thing and meet all the ground rules that people have, and all that we have. We think it's a good, sound business. It generates taxes, and it provides jobs, and we can do it in a wholesome way that's compatible with the community. So please consider that. Thank you.
I hope your presentation is nearing its end.
We have 5 more slides.
If you could please hit on the important points.
I'm Terry Eschner. I'm an earth scientist.
We can't hear you unless you speak into the mic.
Pardon me, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'll try to make it quick. I'm Terry
Monterey. I'm a earth scientist with Petroleum. I'm a registered professional geologist. Next slide, please. I'd like to ask all of you to please give some thought to how important oil and gas is in all of our lives. And because of that, please think about how important oil and gas is, just how dependent we are on it, and what great benefits we have from it. And because of that, I encourage you to embrace the idea of supporting oil and gas locally, where it is carefully regulated and where it operates with a lot of sensitivity with protecting the environment. This is having to do with its social responsibility. We use a lot of oil and gas here. Everyone does. It should be supported locally. A lot of the electricity that everyone uses comes from electricity that is made by burning natural gas, which is an oil industry product, and that there are a lot of things listed here that we use electricity for. You can read through that. We use fuels, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel. Those all come from oil and gas. We've talked to people that don't like the oil industry and they use a lot of gasoline, and they'll say as well, I don't oppose gasoline, I oppose oil. And it's because they don't understand that gasoline that's coming from. But there's just a lot of things here that are listed that we use oil and gas for that enhance our lives. Plastics come from oil products. Next slide, please. This is a slide that just goes through all the different types of things you get from this 1 barrel of oil. I'll go to the next slide, please. There's a lot of concern that keeps coming up in oil and gas projects about climate change and global warming, and I don't want to debate the issues, the pros and cons of that here. I would never attempt to do that, but I do want to say that this project will have, let me just mention here that this project that we have in the Angeles Valley is completely irrelevant to the topic of climate change and global warming. That is because this project will not increase the amount of oil or gas that Californians use. It will not do so. What this graph shows at the bottom is the annual usage of oil and gas in California. California uses about 2 million barrels of oil a day. That's about every person uses a barrel about every 5 days or so in California on average. But if we produce more oil, all of the oil that's produced in California is used in California, okay? And we get 34% of our oil from California. The rest is imported. If we produce more oil in California, the Californians are not going to use more oil and gas just because we're producing more oil here. What we would do is reduce the imports. 66% of our oil is imported. So if we find more oil here in California and use more, it will just reduce imports. So there'll be less tankerage of oil coming to our country from foreign lands. But no one is going to start using more oil in California just because we've found some more and we're producing some more. So there's just climate change and global warming are completely irrelevant to this project. Next, please. Just wanted to make the point here with this slide that if Measure Z, I know Measure Z has been thrown out, but if Measure Z type criteria were targeted to other industries, for example, farming, which we don't recommend. We love farming, we support farming, but for example, there's a lot of lettuce and spinach farming in the Salinas Valley, which is, of course, a wonderful thing, and we support it wholly. But one would argue with a Measure Z mentality that it uses a lot of water, it's threatening our water supply, it uses fertilizers and pesticides that may harm the water, minimizes habitat. Habitat is removed through plowing and around the fields to, you want to keep animals away from the crops. And so, on this kind of basis, you could, outlaw farming in Monterey County. And then if you're going to take property rights away from oil and gas, why not farming and then maybe livestock next? Anyway, next slide, please. Social responsibility, again, Californians depend on use a lot of oil and gas. It should be supported locally. And also, not only does the environment matter, that human lives and energy and independence matter also. And we should be independent for national security and to ensure that the men and women in our military are not put in harm's way to protect foreign supplies of oil. It is inexcusable, really, that we have, given the untapped oil resources that we have here at home, that we're not striving to achieve energy independence. Next slide, please. We feel that the Thames Valley project is an opportunity, it's an ideal opportunity to establish a local oil and gas project. The proposed operations are far distant from population centers. They're not located near any houses. They're surrounded by farm and grazing land. We have the support of the resident farmer, rancher, landlord, property owners. We have award-winning operations. TRIO received the Conservation Department's Outstanding Lease Maintenance Award for our operations at Lynch Canyon Fields. We have one of the cleanest operations in the state there. And our project here in Ames Valley, if we're permitted to move forward, will be managed to the same high quality standards. If the project is successful, it will generate jobs and provide substantial tax revenue. Next, please. We've been active in Monterey County for a long time. We are a good neighbor and we're good stewards of the land. And I mentioned the Outstanding Lease Maintenance Award. We consider ourselves environmentalists. I know people are concerned about the environment. Stan Eschner, our chairman, who just spoke, he was one of the founders of the California Area Living Museum in Bakersfield. He's been extremely active there since 1980. And that's not just environmental activism, it's good citizenship. And that's the way we like to conduct our operations. And we are allowed to proceed in Ames Valley. That's how we conduct our operations there as good neighbors and good stewards of the land. If you're going to have any oil and gas operations in Ames Valley, we feel that TRIO Petroleum is who you should want. We're good stewards of the land, good neighbors, and we're oil and gas experts. Thank you.
Thank you.
That will conclude our presentation for now. We'll just reserve some time for rebuttal. Thank you.
I know Commissioner Mendez had asked a question of council. I didn't realize it would be so long until you have a chance to answer it, but why don't we go ahead and
Yeah, I'll make the comments now, and then there may be more questions after we hear from the public testimony. But I'll just say, first of all, Measure Z is not an issue today in your decision. First of all, we don't have a final judgment in that case. We have an intended decision. The court has not yet issued a final judgment, and it remains to be seen whether the judgment will be appealed. But I guess more importantly, what you have before you today is a use permit application. The county, for a long time, far predating Measure Z, has a requirement for a use permit. This project is in land zoned permanent grazing and farmlands. And so when you look at Chapter 2134 and Chapter 2130, which are the relevant zoning rules for those districts, it provides for exploration for and removal of oil and gas subject to obtaining a use permit pursuant to the rules for the use permit that are laid out in Chapter 2174. Under Chapter 2174, in order to grant a use permit, the appropriate authority must make two findings. That the establishment, maintenance, or operation of the use or structure applied for will not, under the circumstances of the particular case, be detrimental to the health, safety, peace, morals, comfort, and general welfare of persons residing or working in the neighborhood of such proposed use, or be detrimental or injurious to property and improvement in the neighborhood or to general welfare of the county. And then the second finding is that the subject property is in compliance with all rules and regulations. So today, the court's decision in Measure C, even though it's not final, did not, in any event, the court was ruling on the specific provisions of Measure Z. Specifically, there is as stated in the findings here, it's quoted, LU 1.23 was added by Measure Z to basically prohibit the drilling of new oil and gas wells on all lands within the county's unincorporated area. But that provision, the effective date of that provision has been stayed in the litigation. So that's why this application was allowed to proceed. So at this point, Measure Z is not a bar to your consideration of this application, but the whole question of the various provisions of Measure Z and whether or not they're preempted, that has to do with the Measure Z provisions. The use permit regulation that I read is not affected by Measure Z, the court's ruling on Measure Z. So it's still in your determination whether or not you can make those findings. So to come back around to Commissioner Mendez's question, yes, in general, you need to show the analytic path based on evidence that gets you to the finding, either that the establishment, maintenance, and operation of the use will not be detrimental, or that you can't make that finding. It will be detrimental. So you are the trier of fact, if you will, and you have to listen to the evidence both from the beginning of the hearing to the end of the hearing. So starting on December 13th and everything that was presented to you, the applicant's testimony, the testimony of the public, all of the evidence that's coming in, and decide whether or not there's substantial evidence to support a finding, either that it will or will not be detrimental. That's within your purview, not affected by the final judgment, or at this point, an intended decision that is not a final judgment in Measure Z. So I hope that's a good start, and I know it's a lot, and we can talk some more about it if you have more questions.
Okay, thank you. We'd like to go to public testimony, so I'm going to ask that we hear the names of the first few speakers. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes per person.
Jacqueline Woodward, Mary Hisacone.
Oh, I think it's the other, that's backwards.
This says Trio Petroleum.
Right,
What
but we submitted it in the opposite order, what we just got.
Well, feel free to come forward, whatever order you prefer.
All right, the first.
My name is Laura Solorio. Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you so much for your patience this morning. My name is Dr. Laura Solorio. I've been a resident of Salinas for 32 years, and I retired as an internal medicine physician with the county for that entire time, both at Natividad Hospital and the clinics. I am definitely concerned about the health of residents of Monterey County. I'm also the president of Protect Monterey County, and I can assure you that Measure Z will be defended in the fullest, and we do plan an appeal with or without the County of Monterey. The oil industry can and does have negative effects on the health of residents who reside in proximity to oil and gas production areas, and there are many occupational hazards. 5 workers died in Oklahoma on January 22nd of this year when there was an uncontrolled gas release which led to an explosion. When accidents such as these occur, there can be loss of life and contamination of surrounding soil and water. Robert David Taylor was a Chevron supervisor who was checking on a well which was using cyclic steaming, not even fracking. As he approached the well, he fell into a sinkhole created by destabilized earth created by years of cyclic steaming. He disappeared into it, and it took 17 hours to recover his body. Significant exposure to harmful chemicals used and produced during exploration and production of oil and gas can have a negative impact on health. Contamination of water can affect residents miles away. Cancer, increase in asthma attacks, perinatal complications such as premature birth, birth defects, etc., are all associated with living near oil and gas production. Chemicals used in oil and gas production, in addition to chemicals brought from deep in the earth, such as naturally occurring radioactive substances called norms, and hazardous ions such as aluminum, arsenic, copper, lead, and nitrates, which should stay deep down in the earth, all cause health risk. Increase in seismic activity can also affect the health of a community. In 1963, the Baldwin Hills Reservoir in metropolitan Los Angeles broke open, releasing 250 million gallons of water, destroying 277 homes and killing 5 people and affecting a square mile of a residential area. A decade-long study looking at the cause of the disaster concluded that water injection, not fracking, for oil recovery in the Inglewood oil field nearby was a contributing factor. These concerns and those of other speakers today will hopefully convince you to protect Monterey County for its current residents and future generations. I also appreciate Commissioner Duflock's, look at her conflict of interest. I would say, though, that Commissioner Duflock is a plaintiff in the Measure Z case, and I'm not sure whether that would lead to a conflict of interest. So with all due respect, I would just consider that, since most of the speakers today are from Protect Monterey County. Thank you so much.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jan Schreiner, and I'm a resident of Marina. I also serve on the Marina Coast Water District Board. These comments are not authorized by that particular board, and I'm just saying that to let you know. I would like you to deny the proposal of these new oil wells, and I appreciate your time and effort in considering this matter. I know you're all volunteers, and I totally recognize a difficult decision as a volunteer. I make them as well. I have gone to a lot of meetings, and one of them that I went to was in King City. It was a Dogger meeting. It was in relation to expansion of an injection area for untreated wastewater from the petroleum industry. I was surprised when Dogger staff mentioned that these aquifers that untreated wastewater are being injected into are never going to be used. And for the reasoning was because agricultural lands are being converted to residential, and the Marina Coast Water District is building a desalination plant in Moss Landing. I found both of those statements to be untrue, and I found it surprising that the staff did not mention Salinas Valley Groundwater Basin as being critically overdrafted. So this is misinformation, not to fault Dogger staff, but simply because the state regulatory body does not have a very broad scope and is not always getting the information that they need to make appropriate decisions. I also went to a Monterey County exemptions meeting in 2017. After listening for 2 hours to attorneys, I suggested that perhaps the exemptions language could include that if the process contains any known carcinogens or known neurotoxins, that there would be no exemption. Immediately, attorneys, including at least one here, rose out of their seats to explain there could be nothing new added to this exemption process. For me, being concerned about drinking water and the state of agriculture in our basin, these are not new concepts. Neurotoxins and carcinogens should not be injected into the aquifer. The mitigated negative declaration, as described by a trio, is not as thorough as a complete and full environmental impact review. The legal issue of concern here, there are also lawsuits blaming and faulting oil industry for misleading public on climate change. Please keep that in mind and deny the request for this proposed special use permit.
Good morning. My name is Denise Frischmann. I live in Pacific Grove, and I am the president of Communities for Sustainable Monterey County. First off, I want to thank you for denying Trio's application for drilling 4 new wells. That's the right thing to do, given the results of Measure Z, which you know is being appealed. So the last word has not been said on that. And And that measure expressed very clearly the wish of the majority of the voters in Monterey County. I experienced firsthand how strongly people feel about not expanding petroleum production on our county land. For several months, I interfaced with hundreds and hundreds of county residents while collecting signatures to qualify Measure Z for the ballot and canvassing for the campaign. People voted for the preservation of our water resources, land resources, and protection of our climate. No equivocation whatsoever when they signed the petition and expressed support for Measure Z. People are very concerned about climate change and what the future holds for the next generations if we hold on to the status quo of expanded oil production. There are alternatives, and that's where we should put our efforts. By the way, those alternatives, when you read business reports, they create more jobs, and increasingly so, than the oil industry. And I would say that renewables ensures better national security and energy independence. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Planning Commission members. My name is Judy Karras, and while I was riding here today with a friend, she said that I tend to overload my conversation with many details and that I should stick to the main points. So I'm going to make an effort to stick to the main points, and I'll try and be concise about it. Yesterday I was substituting at Pacific Grove Middle School, and I had a chance to look at a book that the teacher had called Coast Alive, Teacher Guide, Activities that Explore the Central California Diverse Coast. In it, they talked a little bit about the fact that, quote unquote, the entire coast of California is tectonically active, with hotspots, active faults, and seafloor rising. And going and doing a little research online, this is documented, not just my opinion, the active fault slip zone that is greater than 10 millimeters a year, the red line goes right through Central California. My concern is that even with plugged wells that we have here, that they're not being monitored, and active wells, who knows what would happen were there a very severe earthquake. The damage to the aquifer could be severe. My second comment is that even though Javier Becerra, our Attorney General, has filed a lawsuit against the Bureau of Land Management because they want to say that we don't have to reveal toxic materials, or the oil companies don't have to reveal toxic materials, it's not guaranteed, and there may come a time when oil companies will be able to inject materials into the ground and not have to let the public know of the potential hazards from these. And I'm very concerned about that, even though in the letter that Steve Craig wrote to you, his first comment is that these wells have been drilled, this is quote unquote Steve Craig, these wells have been drilled over the past decade. BLM itself categorizes the shales in Hayes Valley as very low value in terms of productivity, and with recovery by steam injection being the only economic means to withdraw heavy crude from the San Ardo Formation. And he says, therefore the definition of these wells as test wells is improper and not accurate. I would encourage you to read his comments thoroughly. He has done research on this for 10 years. I know I attended the hearing that DOGGR did at the Hilton some years ago, and he was knowledgeable back then. He's been doing the research. And in light of that, I wish to say that when the Division of Gas and Geothermal Energies, GGR regulations, when they revised their regulations, at that time, in April, or prior to that, in April 2013, there were a number of bills before the state. AB 1301, moratorium on fracking, AB 1323, Mitchell's very comprehensive moratorium on fracking until a study was done Advisory Commission doing a great study, SB4, which I think was the one that passed, and that requires that well operators obtain a permit after the study was done on the environmental health and safety conducted that was done. So these all came about because it was the will of the people, that we were concerned about what's going on. And Measure Z passed because of our concern, not just idle, opinionated concerns, because of what we've read and we know about things going in other places. And DOGGR has pretty modest regulations. We do not have the most strict environmental regulations in the country, to be sure, but partly because some of the people that are working for DOGGR, they've had past ties with the oil industries, and our governor too, much as he's good in other areas statewide, the oil companies really have a preponderance of support on their side in terms of government bodies. So I'm asking that you consider our comments, and please consider that when things are being brought up from deep under the ground, this could risk damaging deep aquifers, which may need to be tapped in for potable water, just as is happening in Cape Town, South Africa. So, and also what can be brought up, and I think that red light means my time's up.
Yes, it does.
So I should not go on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello. My name is Michelle Rainey, and I live in Pacific Grove. I was a volunteer for Protect Monterey County. The reason Measure Z was passed by a majority of the voters was because of our concern for the safety of our water supply. Industry safeguards and regulations have been shown to be insufficient in protecting the potable waters. 4 new exploratory wells could result in dozens of production wells, which is, I'm sure, their ultimate desire. Close to a major water supply for this county, which should be of great concern to county and the local jurisdictions. All the parcels that these wells are being drilled on adjoin Nacimiento Lake Drive, and one of the parcels actually has the San Antonio River running through it, one corner of it. And I noticed none of their diagrams showed the waters that are surrounding all of these drills. Early scientific analysis predicted that the risks associated with waste injection wells would be negligible. Now we are learning that there's a difference between scientific analysis and scientific evidence. Unfortunately, experience has indicated that disposing of waste deep underground has been linked to water contamination, destroyed ecosystems, toxic leaks, and earthquakes. The ruling of Judge Wills is not final, and an appeal will be filed. There should not be a glut of new wells approved while Measure Z is on appeal. This would negate the vote of the electorate and could result in irreparable harm to our water supply. I would ask the Planning Commission recognize the concerns and desires and protect our waters, and confirm the findings and decisions as outlined in Exhibit A of for this hearing until there is a final decision on Measure Z. Thank you. Oh, one comment. One of the speakers talked about the negative impact or the positive impacts of oil industry, but there are also negative industries on agriculture and the vacation industries in this county, and the cumulative effects of dozens of production wells was not considered in the Romero report or Rincon development report that they referred to as being so wonderful. Thank you.
If you would like to come forward in the order that you would like, please move that way, or I will read the next name.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Jane Bell, and I'm from Pebble Beach. Thank you for your decision to deny the request by Trio Oil to embark on exploratory drilling in entirely new areas in South County. This new drilling clearly violates Measure Z's prohibitions, still in litigation. I urge you to formally adopt draft resolution denying their request for a permit. These proposed new wells are very close to Salinas River and its aquifers. It is increasingly important to protect our water supplies. Earthquakes are an unpredictable danger, as has been discussed, and do not allow new areas to be endangered. The oil company's lawyers have testified in court that Measure Z would put them out of business. Measure Z allows years for them to phase out business practices that are harmful to the environment. Oil companies have known since the 1970s about climate change from their own scientists, research, and admittedly hired people to obscure that science. They have had all this time to change their practices. It is astounding to learn how much energy and water is used to extract oil, not just the test wells, but the actual extraction, and energy to transport it, refine it, dispose of byproducts, pumping them back into the ground. And so much carbon is going into the atmosphere even before oil is burnt for fuel. While this is a local issue today before us, details of property rights, oil companies against hardworking government employees, issues of tax, issues of exemptions and takings and so forth. We must see the bigger picture and do everything we can to restore balance in our unique planet's atmosphere. Ice caps are melting, the Great Barrier Reef corals are dying, glacier water supplies are melting off, just some examples. So please support Measure Z, and the majority of Monterey County citizens voted to protect our environment. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Susie Dacry, and I live in Pacific Grove. I want to join my friends and thank you for voting against the Trio Oil Company's request for drilling new wells last time. And I encourage you and hope that you will do the same today. Do not let the oil companies tear apart our land and poison our water, putting our air, climate, and water in danger. The potential harm for more wells is real. The Planning Commission should not approve this or any other project that would violate Measure Z. Please wait for the litigation to be resolved. Since one of the components of Measure Z is that drilling new wells is not acceptable, and for good reason, since the impact of transporting, refining, and burning oil and gas is devastating to the environment. Please vote against Trio Oil Company's request for drilling new wells. Thank you.
My name is Sylvia Shi. I'm from Seaside. And this is 2018. I want us to look at the evidence on the ground because we can see the storms, the fires, the earthquakes coming in. We may not be able to link any specific event to a particular oil industry's action, but it's happening. We need to know that continue to drill for oil production is really counterproductive for our environment, for our life, for our future generation. I think that in the past, there might be some argument because we need the oil, we need the energy. But in today, we know that the progression in the sustainable field for the solar heat and sunlight and the winds are really things we can harness, and it really creates more jobs. So for the future of our children and for us, for the environment, don't dig up the earth anymore, because you can imagine the earth being dug here and there. Things will happen. Earthquake will be more severe. So let's make a win-win situation for the environment, for the children, for the board, and even for the oil companies, because it's time to move forward. Thank you.
I don't think I could follow that. My name is Lynn Rubian. I'm from Pacific Grove, and I am one of hundreds of volunteers that worked all over the county. I, of course, most of my work up here to get the Measures E passed. So that's what I want to mention first and foremost. I'm going to make this very brief. I do know that some of you have voted already against the what is being requested, and I ask you who have not yet voted and must make a decision to please fully support your fellow commissioners who by their recent actions have already rejected the expansion of oil activity in Monterey County. And that's what we're asking for. And thank you for what you're doing.
Good morning, my name is Diana Hennington. I'm a resident of Monterey County and ask that you deny the request by TRIO to drill 4 new wells in Haynes Valley. I've been a social worker in this county since 1992, and my expertise, if any, is in listening to people. I have participated in this conversation and listened to the hopes of worry and worries of fellow county residents. As I understand it, the role of the Planning Commission is not so different than my own. To listen to our fellows, and in this case, to consider how we use land. This community has clearly expressed our concerns and values in regards to sustainable land use. This voice was clearly heard in the vote for Measure Z, where the citizens of Monterey County decided that our values and our priorities lie with sustainable land use planning, and that increasing fossil fuel production in this county does not fit those community values and public planning decisions. As Californians who live here, we understand that water is our most precious commodity, if we even call it a commodity. Truly, in this state, water is life. Especially in the drought conditions that have marked our last decade and is expected to continue, we can't afford to increase overdraft of water resources or poison our water with toxic oil extraction byproducts. The oil extraction process for Monterey Shale requires massive amounts of water, and the community can't afford to increase overdraft of groundwater in the interest of profit to a single enterprise. In addition, oil production activities take place adjacent to groundwater basins in the Salinas River, which feeds the entire Salinas Valley and empties into a national marine sanctuary. Migration of toxic fluids from oil production into our groundwater puts at risk water for human and agricultural use. In addition, proposed drilling lies in a seismically active area near the San Andreas fault line, San Antonio thrust fault, and the Los Lobos thrust fault. Damage to casings, wells, and fracture lines by earthquake puts our water at risk also. In regards to the negative declaration, I do wonder about the sources of evidence. If the conclusions drawn are so different between RINCON and the Center for Biological Diversity, that would benefit from more study. In addition, our long deliberated general plan developed with broad public input is a guide to accepted standards of community development. And I wonder, is resource extraction compatible with land use plans and policies in the Haynes Valley, which is part of the wine growing corridor? Finally, litigation over Measure Z, which bans the drilling of new wells, is not yet settled. Appeals are in process, as you've heard. No action to approve new wells to be taken until the issue is settled. Please enact your role to listen to the people and honor your ethical obligation to plan for the benefit of this entire community and not just one entity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And at this moment, I'm going to, we're way past time for our morning break, so we're going to take that break. Okay, we're going to recommence with public testimony. I see we already have someone at the, ready to address us, which is great. So we'll go right ahead. We'll go straight into that.
My name is Jacqueline Woodward, and I live in Carmel. And I have a simple and very direct message. We have a responsibility for future generations to address climate change right now. And it begins with stopping new projects like this from going forward. Thank you.
Good morning, it is morning. Commissioners, my name is Linda Moran, and Colonel Rutledge. And I just want to say ditto to that very short, pithy comment that was just made about climate change. And just to remind us that not only did this county pass Measure Z, but we have also joined in a JPA for Monterey Bay Community Power, the point of which is to indeed wean ourselves off of gas and oil, fossil fuels, and onto alternative, sustainable energy sources. And there's a reason for that and a wisdom to that and a yearning, I think a deep kind of yearning on the part of our citizens who know that climate change is real and who know that it would have been better 10, 15 years ago to have made this transition, and that we're going to have to live into the effects of some terrible tipping points that we've already passed. And if any of us has read even a little of that climate change science, we know that we're in for some trouble in the future. We've got to do everything now to mitigate, and that means weaning ourselves off of gas and oil. Understandably, the oil companies do not want to strand assets in the ground. They want to make all the money they can from their asset. But unfortunately, that asset is killing us. Collectively, it really is. And so I agree that they need to transition into another form of energy production, and I hope that they will do that, but they're going to fight until the bitter end. And we just have to make sure that the bitter end is not the bitter end for all of us and our future generations. So taking the cue from the citizens who have chosen community power as an alternative to PG&E, for instance, please, I plead with you to reject that permit. Thank you.
My name is Mary Shaw Coran. I'm from Aromas, and I really echo Linda's comments. I think she really points out the need to look at the big picture. I think even though this is a very, in the eyes of many people, just about a permit for 4 wells, you're making actually a decision about the kind of future that we will have. And I think, as my other friends have talked about, the citizens in Monterey County have made a very wise decision. And even though the judge has overturned 2/3 of it, we are very confident that it will be upheld at the appellate court or the state Supreme Court. It's precedent setting. But I want to also now move to a sort of very technical sort of level, or lower level, and that is about the fact that Trio Petroleum is a very small company. And one of the things you should remember about small companies is that they don't have that much assets. They live on the edge, and they put the citizens of Monterey County at risk more than the larger companies. And I just want to point out, I sent this in an email just recently to you folks, might not have read it yet. There's a report from the county. I think Grace Bogdan was involved in it when she was the planner. She's left since. It's about a permit that was granted to Trio Petroleum a few years ago. And that report, which I sent you the PDF for it, talks about the NOCO. They were also drilling in Haines Valley, this area that we're looking at. They did fracking and acidizing, and the NOCO went bankrupt. They're not a very big company. The reason they went bankrupt is, I believe, because of the oil spill they were involved in Santa Barbara. And so as a consequence of the litigation, they went bankrupt. They did not, the report talks about the fact that Vinoco did not clean up their site. There was 2 wells where they did fracking and acidizing in Haines Valley. And I think that's very significant to remember that small companies put us at risk. And there's another oil field, Sargent oil field, which is north of Monterey County, just very slightly. They're dealing with Patriot Resources, which also went bankrupt recently. And Santa Clara County is having to deal with cleaning up, capping the wells. It's going to cost $1 million. I was talking to the Central Coast Water Resource Board engineer about the wastewater ponds and wastewater injection wells in this county. They pointed, I can't remember now, I can dig it up and give it to you, but there's another small company that went bankrupt recently in Monterey, and they left a wastewater pond from their oil drilling, totally abandoned it. So the state and the owner of that property, who this oil company leased from, are trying to figure out how to clean that up. So I would like to point out to you that unless there's a very large bond involved that will guarantee a cleanup of this area, I think that by allowing TRIO to move forward, we're putting our groundwater at risk. Thank you so much. Oh, and there's also letters from our attorneys, which we forgot to give you copies of. I'll send this to you.
Still good morning. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Andy Shawcorn. I too live in Aromas and was actively involved in the effort to pass Measure Z. And I know Measure Z is not the subject of this. The only thing you probably want to keep in consideration from Measure Z is that the overwhelming number of people, in spite of an 18-to-1 advantage by the oil industry, said that their general perspective is that they don't want to go down to a petroleum future. And in terms of the judge's decision regarding Measure Z, the one that's probably the faultiest part of this decision was the one that challenged your traditional police powers over land use. Many decisions have been made upholding counties and cities' rights to say no to the expansion of oil drilling. And that's what you're really talking about here, is the expansion of oil drilling activities. And whether you want to do this or not, whether you think it's the right thing to do, whether it's consistent with your general idea of development in this county, we're convinced that it'll probably end up in the Supreme Court, that will be upheld. Otherwise, you won't have much to say about almost any industrial activities and whether they happen or don't happen. In terms of this particular activity, one of the things they talk about, they're drilling in areas that were created by seismic activity, those folds that they're working on. This is a very seismically active area. It affects the infrastructure of oil development. We know from Tony and Graffi at Cornell that even in the best of situations, 5% of all oil wells leak from day one. And as they age, they leak more. So what you're talking about is creating avenues of movement from down below through shallow aquifers that affect us all. In terms of finding that this is or is not detrimental, I don't think you can make a decision based on what you've got right now that this is not detrimental, because there's not been a comprehensive environmental impact review of this case. Our folks, our attorneys, have presented to you about 17 pages of concerns regarding the environment. And I think before you even consider moving forward in this area, you do a much more comprehensive review. So I thank those of you who voted to oppose this project. And first, I think you should stick to your guns. Thank you very much.
Hi, Wes Weiss, Salinas resident, community enthusiast, social and environmental justice activist. I guess, earlier I got a friend who says that there's a lot of exporting actually happening from California oil to like China, and he's got an article for that, but that was one thing. They mentioned drilling for shale, which sounds kind of, I'm not sure about That's really what we should be going after. We signed up for Monterey Bay Community Power. You know, we shouldn't be so addicted to stuff that's dirty. We should be looking at clean energy, the wind, solar, and water. That's what we need to be focusing on more. You know, the tidal stuff. There's a lot of energy already in this world. We don't need to be making it a worse condition. You know, we've had this thing that's been going strong 70 years. In the 80s or 70s, the EPA said no more, but yet they got an exemption. So we've been working off of borrowed time for 30 years at least, 30, 40 years. We need to be mature, and you know, what happens when people are winners? They want to win, they always got to win. You know, we're making money, we need to make more money. The last guy to talk to you, that seemed to be a primary objective, is making money. What do you do to make money? Well, what are you willing to sacrifice to make that money? Are we willing to subvert some information? Not talk about stuff, look at how BP and all these other places that damages already happened, and they never really mitigated to even be responsible to clean that up, and yet we're still making billions of dollars a quarter. So where's the actual responsibility? I don't really see it happening the way these laws work in this country. We're not really worried about being responsible, and that's a business and government partnership, and it seems like that's a downhill toilet bowl we've been circling for a while, and we need to mature, need to grow up, we need to be doing clean, sustainable, renewable energy, not fossil fuels, because we're the sinkholes. There's so much damage happening from all this climate change stuff, and we need to wake up and see what's happening. We're going to pop this ozone layer, and we're going to turn it into a dirt ball just floating, and nothing's going to change. Like, how's that really going to affect the universe? Shouldn't we be more proactive than that?
We have no more speakers list. Is there anyone else who would like to address the commission on this issue? Any other member of the public? I don't see anyone. So I'll ask the applicant or the applicant's representative if they would like to respond to the public comment.
Yes, Commissioner Vanderveer, I would. I will, you've heard a lot, but I'll make this tailored to the specific issues. I think one of the items that has not been fully addressed, but I think everybody understands, is this commission has a lot of discretion. The mere fact of an initial study or negative debt having been drafted does not compel the commission to take any specific action. And I think that I want to be very clear on that. However, and there's always a however, the decision does need to be based on the evidence. And in this case, all of the evidence that had initially been provided showed why there was not an environmental impact and a negative declaration would have been appropriate. The new findings that have come in were changed for what looks like political reasons. We want findings that support the opposite side. But they're not based on any evidence. They're not based on any facts. They are based on large-scale assumptions that are not tailored to this project. And so because of that, it is my firm opinion that the substantial evidence only leads in one direction. Moreover, this commission has to exercise its discretion within certain boundaries. One is this commission can only take into account factors that it is allowed to consider. As Judge Wills noted in the Measure Z, one of the factors that this commission cannot consider is the downhole underground environmental impacts from drilling. That was the basis for Measure Z, and the judge says that's not a proper consideration. So we take those off the table, and the reason why I say that is because most of what we heard here today is talking about fracking, talking about aquifers, talking about earthquakes, underground problems. Those are not considerations that would be properly looked at by a local entity. In 1976, the California Attorney General issued an opinion that said, state oil and gas law preempts nearly all local regulations of oil and gas production because local regulations of such resources would subject development of the state's fuel resources to a checkerboard of regulations. Because of that, there are certain boundaries, considerations of oil and gas production techniques, what's going to happen under the ground, that is not properly before this commission. The next issue that this commission has to consider is the very significant takings issue. My client has a property right. Judge Wills has said this property right, if it is taken, this type of property right, if it is taken by a no drilling ordinance, is a facial taking that needs compensation. This particular application was not in the Measure Z trial, so what I'm doing is I'm analogizing the Measure Z ruling, but I believe it's directly applicable to what we're doing here. Finally, I would ask, what's the evidence that we've seen? We've seen evidence on fracking. We're not fracking. You've heard about a 17-page analysis from CBD, but in reality, that doesn't apply to our project at all. The analysis that we've heard is about the evils of oil in general. Nothing is talking about the Haynes Valley hydrogeological climate and what will happen from 4 test wells. That's the evidence we need to be looking at. We are not drilling to 300 feet. We're not drilling to 400 feet. We're not tapping into the aquifers. As you heard earlier, we're drilling to 4,000 feet. I think it is also critical that again, as I had mentioned earlier, when we're talking about, we're living on the edge. The water is going to be contaminated, and we've heard all of this. Again, not tailored to this project. Dr. Laura Solorio, and I don't want to underestimate the concerns of the local population. Please don't think that I'm doing that. I'm not at all. But Dr. Laura Solorio mentioned, and so did several other witnesses, the problem here is the state is not doing its job. Dogger is not regulating enough. Dogger should be doing more to protect. But those issues have to be taken up with Dogger. This planning commission should not be inserting itself in an oversight role on Dogger and saying, well, Dogger's not doing enough, therefore we need to jump in. I understand that temptation, and I understand that fear and that concern. But as Judge Wills said in his ruling, this is a state-level issue. And if you want to look at what the voters have said, the voters of the state of California have said, Monterey, we do not want you regulating this. Los Angeles County, we do not want you regulating this. Kern County, we do not want you regulating this. We want California to be regulating this. The United States federal government has said, we want the state of California regulating this. And so I understand fully the discretion that this board has. I would suggest that it really can only be exercised in one direction. Again, if you have any other questions, I would be willing to take them up. One final issue about Ms. Duflock, Commissioner Duflock. I believe, as Ms. Strimling noted, Measure Z is, I think it's very applicable in this case, but this is not a Measure Z case. And so I believe that Commissioner Duflock's relationship to the Measure Z trial would have no basis whatsoever on a recusal, and just for clean air or for open air. I'm not one of the attorneys who gave the opinion. She consulted others, but I would agree with that advice. That I don't see a basis for recusal. Thank you very much.
I'm going to bring it back to staff. I think looks like counsel had some comments she would like to make regarding the interpretation of the law.
Okay, yeah, sure. First, I just would like to address preemption. This is a kind of a broad overview, but to the extent the state has jurisdiction over the downhole operations, that does not preclude the county from having land use authority over above ground land uses. And so the judge's decision here, first of all, it's only an intended decision. It is not final, may be subject to appeals. And having said all of that, the language that's being quoted by the applicant was very specific to the prohibitions on wastewater injection that are in Measure Z. So this ruling doesn't invalidate the county's Title 21 use permit authority to evaluate land uses. Second of all, with regard to the takings issue, as the applicant just stated, this particular application was not part of the trial, so there is no ruling, even an intended decision with regard to your decision on this and whether or not that would be a takings, and and certainly that issue is not ripe for review either. I think it does come back to your decision whether there is evidence to support the findings required under Title 21. Is the use permit detrimental or not detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare?
Thank you. Does staff have any response to the testimony of the applicant and public? Okay. All members of the commission? Anyone have a comment? Commissioner Wizard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know the appropriate person to ask this question, to whom I should be asking this question, but the question I have is, I'm concerned about the integrity of steel and cement in an earthquake and the proximity of faults to these proposed wells and the required force of such an earthquake to cause friction to an extent that would shear the well, cap or production.
Perhaps staff could tell us how those type of issues have been addressed in the...
I will have to look at the initial study. It'll take me a minute. I'll get back to you.
Sure. While we're waiting for that, is there anything else, any other questions or comments or motions or Commissioner Gesselman?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is not a question. This is basically my feelings about this issue. I was against the direction of the Planning Commission last time, and so I'm going to vote against this particular, the way this was brought back to us. But my feelings haven't changed. My feelings are still edging on the takings item, which I mentioned last time. That concerns me. It also concerns me that, and this is just my logical or illogical mind, depending on how you look at it, but we might be setting ourselves up with this decision the same way the Measure Z was set up for a lawsuit. And I don't see a whole lot of difference in the outcome for either of those. I mean, the outcome that happened in Z with the judge going against it, and I think if this were brought to a court of law, they would say the same thing. I think that the staff, and I am a little upset by this, some of the letters I read implied, some of the members of the public implied the county staff, I think the exact statement was in bed with the oil companies. That upsets me a little because these people do the best they can with the ordinances and the general plan they have in front of them, and they arrive at the decision that's dictated by those documents. They don't get into a political thing, nor are they concerned about political issues. I think that was over the line, in my opinion. And on the same basis, I believe they did a good job. I think they followed the rules and the ordinances, and they came to the conclusion that I agree with, that with the current ordinance, which I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, goes back to 1982, we tried to put in a different ordinance 3 years ago. Before the Measure Z initiative took off, we tried to update the ordinance. We were not able to. The Board of Supervisors did not agree with our position. But I would recommend to the people out there in the audience, if they're upset with the outcome of this particular hearing, that a better avenue for change would be to address with the Board of Supervisors why this ordinance hasn't been updated since 1982. My personal feeling is there probably are some things that need to be changed. But under the current ordinance, under the current general plan, and under the direction that I heard from the county council, I can't find any way that we would just be against this. Yeah, that's it. It's the end of my list, so that's the end of my statement that I will not be supporting this agenda item as the staff brought it to us.
Thank you. Staff have a response to the Commissioner?
Yeah, I'm looking at the geology section of the initial study, and as far as earthquake faults, the nearest fault is the Rinconada fault zone, which is about 3 miles west of the site, and then the nearest Aliquest Priolo fault zone is about 20 miles from the site. And it says, therefore, the potential for surface fault rupture on the site is low. And then in terms of liquefaction, it says that there's a low potential for liquefaction or other seismic ground failure, and there are no historic records of liquefaction present in the project area.
Thank you. Commissioner Roberts.
I just wanted to say that I agree with Commissioner Getzelman. I also did not support what came back in front of us. But I have been very conflicted with this issue because I voted in favor of Measure Z. I don't want to see oil drilled in Monterey County. I have the same concerns as everyone who has presented here today. And so my conflict is in sitting here as a commissioner trying to make an unbiased decision. And obviously we all have biases and those play into our decisions, but when this recommendation was given to us last week, I read it and I read some of the findings for why we weren't going to support this project. And it really kind of upset me to see that we had been given all this information that this was deleterious to the health of the county, and I personally had not seen that. And so, again, my gut is that yes, this probably isn't the best thing for Monterey County, but we haven't. This applicant has gone through the process, has had an independent environmental study that says we have no significant environmental effects, and we're not being asked to make a statement of overriding conditions today. We're being asked to consider the information in front of us, and so for that reason I also will not be supporting this new recommendation.
Commissioner Deal.
We've gotten a lot of information since the last hearing. Among those have been some letters that I believe in my mind qualify as a disagreement among experts. And both the disagreement among experts and public controversy are reasons that would trigger a further and more extensive environmental review, namely an environmental impact statement. And that process-wise is certainly my experience. That's what happens when you get new information and then you have a disagreement among experts about whether or not there are, and again, I would exempt all the downhole discussion here because we've been completely warned off of that because we're not in our jurisdiction, but the air and the surface water and land use and cumulative impacts to the development of the area certainly are all land use issues that are within our jurisdiction. So it would be my thought that in order to move forward with anything except a continuance for further, a denial which doesn't require CEQA review, or a continuance to do an EIR, I don't think we have any other choices here.
Any other Commissioner Lizard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is probably for environmental health, but I was curious to know, it could be Mr. Schubert, in the negative declaration. What is the, concerning the volatile organic compounds and known carcinogens that are produced and become airborne with commercial oil production, what does that, for lack of a better term, what does that plume look like downwind, and what's the nearest, I guess maybe population centers for long term, because the potential effects to people downwind from these sites.
Mr. Chair. I don't mean to interrupt, but I think one thing that's getting lost here is that these are test wells, this is not oil production, there's a big difference between the two. These wells would have to come back to us again with that kind of information if in fact they went into production.
So does staff have any response? What is the question? Or, yeah, I guess the question was addressed to environmental health.
Janet Paul from Environmental Health. Unfortunately, the well production is not my expertise. I could look into that a little bit, but I understand that that is a federal regulation that looks into those air pollution type things more than environmental health would, but I'm happy to try to dig up some information for you if that's your request.
Is there anyone on the commission who would like to take a stab at making a motion of any kind?
I'm not going to make a motion, but I'm going to make a comment. First of all, I'd like to say that I do agree with Commissioner Deal. We were given so much information that I truly believe that it should be continued. But having said that, there was a slide up there where you have one of the drills not too far, like 2 or 3 miles, according to the scale that was up there with the slides, several miles from our reservoirs, meaning San Antonio and Nacimiento. I believe Nacimiento is our reservoir, even though San Luis Obispo would like to claim it. But anyway, I could only imagine if this was to pass and they were to come back to drill oil, not to just drill test wells, but to drill for oil, and an accident was to happen. I mean, accidents happen all the time in the state of California when it comes to oil, or drilling, all over the country. So that in itself concerns the heck out of me. It scares me. I mean, Monterey is known for ag and obviously domestic consumption. We need that. And if that was to get polluted, I don't know what the hell we would do. So it scares the hell out of me, and I'm going to keep the same vote I had last time. I'm going to keep it today.
Okay, well, Commissioner, please.
I have to agree with Commissioner Mendez. It does scare me that our reservoirs are so close. I am going to keep the vote that I had last time, and I do want to make the motion to come back, continue it, and maybe do the EIR, what Commissioner Deal mentioned.
Okay, maybe we could ask staff how we would proceed if that was the direction the commission wanted to take.
Through the chair, to clarify my remarks, EIRs would only be necessary if we're moving towards approval. If we wish to move towards approval, I would strongly suggest that I don't see a way to do that. Otherwise, myself, I wouldn't be comfortable with the level of review we have. But if we were moving towards denial, it would not be, I think, necessary, and I certainly would speak in favor of not putting the applicant through additional hoops if that were the direction the commission chose to take.
A good point.
I'll take that back because I agree with what we have in front of us today.
So do you like to make a motion regarding that?
Yeah, so can we, I make a motion to pass staff's recommendation.
Okay, which would be in this case to adopt the, how do they put it, find the denial of project is statutorily exempt from CEQA and adopt the draft resolution, etc. Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Ambrose and seconded by Commissioner Deal to adopt the resolution, which would be a resolution of denial for this project. I'd just like to comment that I will support that motion. And just note that the main reason for my belief that that is the right way to go is simply that, as we know, the oil in Monterey County is extremely what they call carbon intensive oil. It takes a lot of energy to get it out of the ground with cyclic steam injection, which is what, of course, is planned in this field as well as in San Ardo. It's heavy crude. The amount of carbon that is associated with both producing it and then burning it is much greater than other oil, which is something we know that it is worse and it does have a greater impact on our climate than burning other oil, contrary to what was suggested during some of the testimony today. That being the fact, we're not talking about regulating, we're talking about a particular project in front of us, and it is conceivable that someone could come before us with a project to drill this type of oil, and that would have some benefit that it was also offering to the people of Monterey County that would be greater than that deficit to the health and safety caused by the impact of burning that oil, in which case I think we could make the finding that it's not detrimental to the health and safety of Monterey County to approve that project. I've seen absolutely nothing in this case to suggest that that's the case in this case. So again, like I say, it's not Measure Z, we're not talking about a regulation of downhole or anything. We're talking about a particular project. So I will support the motion. Is there any other comment on the motion before we vote? I'm not seeing anyone wishing to comment, so I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
No.
Okay, I'd like to ask for a roll call, please.
Commissioner Aubrey? Aye. Commissioner Neal?
Aye.
Commissioner Deepwalk?
No.
Commissioner Getzelman?
No.
Commissioner Mendez?
Aye.
Commissioner Mendoza?
Aye.
Commissioner Padilla?
Abstain.
Commissioner Roberts?
No.
Commissioner Vanderveer?
Aye.
And Commissioner Wizard?
Aye.
Okay, so you have a 6, 3, and 1 abstain, so your motion passes.
Okay. Well, in that case, that will bring us to our second and final item of the day, which is short-term rental code compliance. I know